Today's session we're going to be talking about a little bit about the transition program and what it is for the first sort of 5 minutes or so, and then I'll be handing you over to the very lovely and very experienced Melissa, who's going to be telling you more about mentoring and a bit more of how to practically implement it in nursing and in your workplace and why it's important for nurses to do so. So to start with, we'll start with the Transition to Practice pilot program, which, as you all heard in the plenary, we have been refunded for, which is really fantastic news for us. So it's basically to test and model an accessible, structured yet flexible program over the last few years, which we've been a part of. So there's been a few different sort of types and models that we've tried out with this transition program. But overall, the overall aim of it is to increase the knowledge, skills and confidence of the nurses who are working in primary healthcare, because as many of you know, there's no official program for nurses who are either new to primary healthcare or for the nurses who are transitioning into primary healthcare to actually undertake in Australia. I'm originally from New Zealand and I transitioned straight into primary healthcare from my nursing degree. So I went straight into general practice with the support of a graduate program in New Zealand. And when I came over to Australia, I was actually really surprised that there's no similar program set up here. So I feel really lucky to be able to be part of this pilot program to actually help transition nurses into primary healthcare in Australia, which is a little bit different, from New Zealand. But anyway, so the main outcomes of the program is to improve employment opportunities, improve recruitment and retention of nurses in primary healthcare settings, because as we know, as you may have heard from some of the other sessions, really the ideal way to keep nurses, and it's sort of, you'd think it's a no-brainer, really, the way you keep nurses is to really support them and make sure that they feel like they're valued and make sure that, again, they're getting well paid, what they're supposed to be and should be getting paid as according to what we bring, in our skill sets in primary healthcare. So that's something that our program was trying to look at and trying to help achieve and make sure that these nurses were really nurtured throughout the program. So how did we do that? We did that many different ways. The second tranche that we modelled, it was where the transitioning nurse was working in a supportive workplace team, and they had access to an external clinical and professional mentor. So that external clinical and professional mentor would assist them through any questions that they might have around the program and around their transition experience, around their workplace, and they had access to them pretty much any time that they needed it. Xian Tang, who you saw was New Graduate Year Nurse of the Year. I'm very proud because she's actually one of our transitioning nurses. So I was very, very happy to see that she got Transitioning Nurse of the Year or recently graduated Nurse of the Year. The other way that we supported these nurses was through educational activities. We had a heap of education activities for the nurses to complete. They could choose from a range of core educational activities that we'd suggest as a starting point, and then they also had an optional ones that they could select from. We also provided them with an assessment framework, so it was a self-assessment tool where they could self-select what it was that they were needing to do, help them try and prioritise their work, and we'd also obviously have access to the APNA support team. So that was myself and Lise, who were also there for not only the transitioning nurses, but also the mentors as well, because obviously with, as with anything, there's always going to be a few things to work through, depending on where you're working as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Melissa. Now, Melissa is very, very experienced in mentoring. She is an expert in coach and mentoring, has worked in the field for nearly 20 years. designed and implemented mentoring programs, and she is also an enthusiast for personal and professional development. She's got an undergrad degree in psychology, postgrad quals in strategic marketing, counselling, and a master's degree in organisational coaching. So I'd like to introduce you to Melissa, and she'll carry on from here. So thank you.
Hi everyone. This is being filmed, so they've told me I've got to stand fixed to this spot as much as I can, which is very, very frustrating because I like to move around. But thank you for having me. I am going to talk to you, and we're going to have a session today about mentoring. I'd love to encourage the people up the back to come and fill up the spaces at the tables, because we will be doing some exercises and it'll be good for you to arrange yourselves into some groups. So if you're up for that, that would be fantastic. So just while you're getting settled, I just wanted to say a little bit more about why I got involved in mentoring, and it was actually more than 20 years ago now. I'm going to have to change my bio. I started a mentoring program for young women working in marketing because that was my first career. And over time, I've done that for a few years, and we had a consultant helping us, and she left, and someone said, "Oh, Melissa, you know how to do this. Why don't you run the program now?" So I started running that program. We'd set up our own professional association to actually launch and run this program. And after quite a few years, I decided, actually, you know what, I like this better than my paid work. And I made a career change and went into coaching and mentoring. And what I loved about it was we'd get to the end of a program and there would be a few people in the room who would stand up and say something like, "I'm not the same person as I was before I started. I've had, the great privilege of having this person mentor me, and it's been such a life-changing experience that I'm so grateful for." And I remember, the hair on the back of my neck used to stand up, and you kind of went home thinking, wow, that's fantastic. So I got to see, and I got a bit of a glimpse then at what mentoring can actually do for people. So I'm really interested to know, why are you here today? Why, not at the conference, but why did you choose this session to come to? Are you part of the program that Rebecca was talking about, or are you just interested? Can we hear from a couple of people around the room? What's your interest in being here today?
I did a undergraduate transition program through my local PHN, and that was last year. And this year I have my own new grad, so I just want to know how I can be a better, as still a new grad myself, be a better mentor.
Just hold it up a bit closer. Yeah. So wondering how you could be a better mentor. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
I'm here because I've entered into an arrangement with our local hospital, which is about 40 kilometres away, to take on one of their graduate, or two of their graduate nurses to rotate into the GP practice for 6 months at a time as a workforce initiative. So I'm wanting to make the best of the opportunity. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, great. And many people are called upon in all walks of life to become mentors, and they often say to us, "But I don't know what I'm doing." Am I doing it right? Well, there is no right. There are ways to be more effective and more masterful at mentoring, but don't feel alone if you actually feel like you don't know what you're doing yet. Anyone else? Lady over here in pink. Anyone in the program? Maybe just raise your hand, the TPP program. Great, so mentors and mentees? Mentors, mentees?
I decided to do this session, so I transitioned out of the hospitals into general practice, was kind of just dropped in it. And after 9 years in the hospitals, I was very, very lucky. I had a terrific experienced practice nurse that I worked under. And then she left, and now I'm responsible for 6 other nurses. So just learning, I want to learn how to be a proper mentor to them, because most of them are new to practice nursing themselves now.
Okay, great. So lots of you are here because you want to understand mentoring better and get better skills. The lady up the front here.
It's very much a slightly different perspective. I'm actually presenting tomorrow about a new graduate program. And one of the issues, we interviewed mentors and new graduates, and one of the issues with mentors were we had no choice in it. We were told we had to do it.
Oh.
And so I'm here more to hear how we can engage mentors and get the general practice nurses involved in the programs similar to what we've done.
Yeah, okay. How do they feel about that? They had no choice in it. No.
The program didn't go well
Yeah.
because there wasn't that initial engagement.
Yeah.
We've been basically told by the GP, we're taking this person on, you're going to be mentoring.
You can't mandate for someone to be a mentor. They either want to or they don't.
If we explain to them what you can get out of it, I'm hoping that you can get more nurses into the
Yeah.
side of it.
Much better for people to offer themselves rather than...
Not always apparently the choice though.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyone have something different? Lady right there.
We're increasing our numbers, and I want to keep our staff fairly stable. Because you do tend to go through at times staff, and I want to be able to set things up and actually have some stability. So I felt that if we could just get a bit more mentoring going, might be able to hold people a little bit longer.
I'll show you some, not the stats, but mentoring is a very effective tool for retention of people. So people who've had a mentor and people who've been mentors are much more likely to stay with the organisation that's sponsoring that mentoring effort. And return, by the way, people who leave will often come back to an organisation if they've had a mentor. The lady just down there, Rebecca.
Hello. I'm involved in setting up a new GP practice in South Australia, in Adelaide. So at the moment I'm the only practice nurse, but I'm looking to, in the future, bring on board other practice nurses, and I'm hoping to entice and encourage nurses. So I'm a nurse educator as well as a clinical nurse, so I'd like to be able to combine the two and encourage more nurses into practice nursing because it's such an exciting area, a growing area. Thank you.
Okay, great. So some role modelling there probably.
So I'm in a new role, which is actually clinician mentor on a national advanced project. So I'm here today to find out any skills I can to make sure that I'm effective in that role.
Great. Okay. So we might move on. Thank you for that. It's really interesting that you're probably here for different reasons, but you all had a notion in your minds when you hear the term mentoring that must bring up some concept for you. But I guarantee you if I asked each person in the room to write down on a piece of paper what mentoring actually is, we'd probably have 50 or so different interpretations. So what do you think mentoring actually is? Let's just hear a few ideas. You can just shout out if you don't want to get the microphone. We can hear you. Guidance? Sharing experience. Yep. Supporting. Enabling others to grow. I'm repeating it because they're filming this and they want me probably to say it on the microphone. I've done this before. Yeah. What else? Inspiring. Yeah. So mentoring can be all of those things and more. How is it different though? And this is, as we were preparing to come along today, Gina, my colleague who's with me here from Art of Mentoring, did this background research on, well, what is there out there in the published literature about mentoring of nurses? We track a lot of research studies, but it's not usually profession specific. But I knew that there was already research out there, so Gina had a look, And one of the confusions that comes up is that there's all these different terms being used in the nursing profession. So where does it actually overlap with supervisors and preceptors? I hadn't even heard of that term, preceptors, by the way. Is that a term used here in Australia commonly? Okay. Because there seems to be quite a lot of overlap, and this is the problem when you look at the research. You don't know when they say it's a mentoring study whether actually what was being done was mentoring or whether it was something a bit different. In its purest form, when we talk about mentoring, it's a developmental relationship. It's not usually the responsibility of the mentor to be an educator or a teacher, nor to be responsible for the quality of the mentee's work. So we're kind of wondering, you know, in the research, is it true mentoring or is it something different? But I think if we stay with the kind of definition that you brought up, then it makes sense. So here's one. It's broadly based and concentrates on developing areas such as career progression, scholarly achievements and personal development. Relationships are based around developing reciprocity and accountability between each partner. So one of the things we like to say about mentoring is it's a very mutual exchange. Both parties tend to get something out of it. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, and I'll call on you to give your thoughts around that. So any thoughts or comments about, you know, what mentoring is and how it might be different from supervision or preceptorship? In its purest form, it's probably more like what's in the bubble there, offline help by one person to another in making significant transitions in knowledge, work or thinking. So we talk about something which is called developmental mentoring, which tends to be the more European form of mentoring, which Australia tends to follow. In the US, it's a lot more sponsorship mentoring. So when mentoring first began in the US, it was a lot more about, you know, dragging people up the career ladder with you or after you. Whereas as mentoring started to flourish in Europe, it was a lot more about helping people develop their capacity. So we follow more the developmental model, which is about, a bit like the old adage, you know, how does it go? Give a man a fish and it'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and he can feed himself for a lifetime. Yeah. So when's a good time for mentoring? So we went and had a look at the research specifically around nursing and found there were benefits for both early career and for more experienced nurses. And that follows the general kind of findings from the research, which is at any stage of your career, particularly at a transition point, that's a really great time for mentoring. Because at those transition points, you'll be reflecting on where you are and maybe having to make some tough choices about where to go next. So has anyone had that, you know, where they've been at a kind of flexion point or transition point in their career and they've drawn on mentors that they maybe know and that's been helpful? I can see a few people nodding. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense, doesn't it? It's a great time to have a sounding board. By the way, do you all have a mentor? Some are going, how many haven't? Yeah, so when I ask this question in a room full of people, often people will say, no, I haven't had a mentor. You may not have had a formal mentor, but if you've ever had someone take an interest in you, you know, someone that you go to from time to time to help brainstorm ideas or get advice, then you probably have had a mentor, you just haven't called them that. Okay, when we go to the general research on what's in it for mentees and for mentors, these are the sorts of things that come up. Lots of studies around better job security. People who've had mentors tend to have higher salaries. Now, it's hard to know a little bit about that because maybe people who are on higher salaries are actually more motivated to get themselves a mentor. So I'm not sure how cause and effect it is, but it's a correlation. They tend to have higher level positions, learn skills like political skills, are more satisfied in their jobs and therefore turn over less, so there's greater retention of people who've been mentored. have a better understanding of the roles and responsibilities of their job. I think these last 2 points are really important, that it's not just about the job outcomes or the professional outcomes, but it's some of these personal outcomes, not incomes. Improve perspective, confidence and professional happiness, and just overall better emotional well-being. So you're all aware of the positive psychology movement. A lot of that is about discovering that our well-being is very much affected by, or our happiness is very much affected by things like, positive thinking, but also if you really want to make yourself feel good, you go and do something for somebody else. That tends to be the thing that contributes a lot to people's happiness. So it's not surprising that on the right-hand side, when we look at benefits for mentors, that they also have greater confidence and happiness and better psychological health. But for mentors too, a lot of the feedback we get, and we've got at the moment about 5,000 people going through programs that we run, so a lot of people. The feedback we often get from the mentors is, I got as much out of it as the mentee did, and also the questions I was being asked gave me an opportunity to really reflect on my own career and start thinking about how I wanted to maybe make some changes and approach a transition point for myself. So a lot of feedback from mentors about how helpful it is. So it'd be really interesting, let's do the next slide and then we'll get some feedback from you. So again, we went to the research and said, okay, if we look at all that mentoring research, and hopefully most of it is real mentoring, let's assume it is, what are some of the benefits that nurses have found from having a mentor or being a mentee? And we looked at the two different career stages, the less experienced level and then the more experienced level. And you can see lots and lots of things that have come out of those studies. So lots of evidence to suggest that nurses benefit hugely from having the experience of having a mentor, about confidence, independence, productivity, competency, insight into career possibilities, being able to reality check on the challenges and rewards of persisting with a nursing career. I'm betting that there's a few people in the room that at some point have thought, do I really want to keep doing this? Is this something that I might want to change away from? Anyone had those sort of thoughts? A couple of people, yeah. And sometimes talking it over with someone will either help you make that exit if that's what's right for you, or potentially stay because that's what's right for you. Maybe you just need someone to talk it through with. And similar things for the more experienced nurse, but focus more on, by more experienced, you're more likely to be looking for better leadership skills. People who are acknowledged as mentors, it does actually build and add to your reputation. The last one, ability to influence as well. So for people who've been in the program, or any kind of program really around mentoring, or had a mentor, what are the sorts of things you've experienced as the benefit of being a mentee? So particularly people who've been in Beck's program. We'd love to hear from you. That would be you?
Thank you. Definitely much more confident.
Hold it right up.
Much more confident now. When I first started in general practice, I came from acute care into general practice, and I think it was about 6 months or so before the transition to practice program came available. Mm-hmm. And I sort of started in general practice and I just went straight in there and had not much knowledge at all of it. It was a shocker. Yep. But coming through the program after 12 months, and I finished in March, fabulous program, much more confident. My scope of practice has certainly increased thanks to my beautiful mentors sitting beside me.
Ah, you're here together, that's nice.
So yeah, I would certainly recommend it to anyone going into primary healthcare if they haven't been in there before.
Mm-hmm. By the way, did you go to things together like conferences as well, or?
No, we actually,
okay. Too far away.
Central Queensland.
Okay. Okay,
So-
but look, isn't that great example of a really successful virtual relationship? Because how did you conduct your conversations?
Telephone, email, text. And
Yeah.
we actually met at the conference for the first time yesterday.
That's
So exciting.
fantastic. Yeah, because one of the questions we're often asked is, what about virtual mentoring? That can't possibly work, can it? Can it work? Yeah.
Like, I would love to have been able to have done that with Beck, but we weren't able to do that in that part. But I'm very lucky in the fact that I work for Queensland Health. So we are big in video conferencing and we're rural. Right. So we use it to tap into anything. And I'm big into getting in front of that screen because you can connect up an iPhone and go straight into a wound and then go into, doing a case scenario. So I think that's the next big step.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I'm from Western Australia, and Sophie was one of my mentees, and I had another girl down about 3.5 hours from Perth.
Hold it right up.
I did one visit. I went for a day trip and went to see her in a practice, and all the rest has been done on the phone and text and email, and it works. It's, Sophie, I was able to visit because she was only down the road, but Camille, it still worked just as effectively.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other mentee experiences? Or are you a mentor? Let's just capture any mentee experiences and then we'll come back to the mentors if that's okay.
I think it was really helpful having a mentor because I was really new to general practice, and then the other nurse I work with, she was not so supportive because she is not so experienced as well. So we had lots of issues at work, but with Helen's help, so it smoothed everything. So it made my transition to practice program, my transition to the general practice was really easy, and that was great.
Yeah, sometimes we feel reluctant to bother our bosses with a whole lot of really pesky questions. So it's great to just quickly send a text to my mentor about this one. Really helpful. Any other mentee experiences? Anything else that you really benefited from?
Just as you said then, just having that sly text message on the side saying, actually, nurse says we should do this, but you've said we should do this. What shall I do here is really helpful. Just bounce those ideas off. Yeah. Because if something Spidey says, no, it's not good, you've got somebody else.
You just have to be sensitive about what you say to to the person you report to. Like we had one program where the mentee kept going back and saying, no, I'm not doing what you say because my mentor says not to do it that way. A very career-limiting move that was.
It's always good to have that, also that evidence-based practice as well behind you to put in front of them and say, well, actually, no, this is what the literature says we should be doing, or is it beneficial to do?
Yeah. And there's a lady down here, Beck. Oh, there, yeah.
So throughout my career, which was in a public health system to start off with, but for about the last 20 years has been as an army nurse, I've experienced being both a mentor and a mentee. It's a dual process. I'm always looking up and I'm always helping sideways and downwards. We do a lot of it remotely. And because we move frequently, the person that you've connected with probably isn't in location, but we try to work under a system of be a role model and have a role model, and don't ever not reach out and share ideas and ask questions and seek support. Worked really well.
Yeah, I love that you've raised the issue of role modelling because it's a very important part of being a mentor is whether you like it or not, you are a role model. So you have to be really careful. And one of the things we say when we're training mentors is often be really self-aware, and if you know you're really bad at something, be explicit and tell your mentee, look, for whatever you do, don't copy my, time management skills because I'm really bad at it. So it does call for mentors to be very self-aware and be careful about how they're presenting themselves to their mentee. Okay, let's now move on to the mentors. So these were some of the benefits demonstrated for nurse mentors. All the usual. I mean, all of this stuff is in all the other research as well. So to be honest, there's not a lot in the nursing mentoring research that's different from what's in other mentoring in other professions. But that wonderful satisfaction from seeing someone grow and develop, there's nothing like that feeling, is there, for people who've mentored? Talked about increased confidence. Yeah, I think confidence is the one universal benefit of mentoring that I notice every single program. Every single person says, I feel more confident than I did before, which is fantastic. Leadership skills, raising my own profile, reaffirming my career journey. You can read all of that. So again, what's your story from the mentors in the room? What are some of the benefits that you've felt you've been able to derive?
So I'm a mentor, and I've also got a regional nurse that I mentor, and I'm in the correctional system, so in the prison system. The great thing is that we can do it from a distance, and I think if you're looking at the difference between a clinical supervision and preceptorship, it's the fact that we don't have to be, as a mentor, we don't have to be with that person to provide mentoring.
Right.
It's been great. I've seen my transitioning nurse grow in confidence, and I think she got there. She may have got there without my support, but I think it makes them become better nurses in our settings if they do have the support.
Yeah.
I think it just accelerates that learning and their confidence. And I've enjoyed it, love it. It's the best.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Lady down here. Thank you for sharing, everybody, by the way. It's really helpful for everybody else to hear from you rather than just me.
I cast my mind back to some early mentoring that I did, and one person in particular I think about, and I encouraged her to move from a fairly generic role that she was in into something more specialised, and that was 20 years ago, and she's now head of the area that she moved into. So I still feel good about that.
And you're still in contact?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Not as frequently, but we still keep in touch. And the other person was a little bit different. I was mentoring a very junior nurse when I was in a reasonably senior position, and in fact it was sort of during the mentoring process that I had some concerns about whether really she was in the right career. And so we had a talk about it, and she did actually end up leaving nursing. So I guess it was a black mark against my name that we lost a nurse, but she really wasn't cut out for nursing. And I lost touch with her for about 2 years, and then she came back and saw me at work one day and thanked me because she'd moved into a completely different industry and was very happy. So it was a different sort of result, I guess.
You know what? She would have left anyway.
She would have done. She would have done. But I think perhaps I got her to reflect on why she was there and was it the right place for her to be.
I like to think of it as you're helping someone make a more graceful exit than they might have made without you. And they probably would have made it. One of the things that comes up, by the way, when we're running mentoring programs inside companies, some of the senior management sometimes get very concerned because they say, well, you know, what if the mentor actually encourages the mentee to leave the company? And that's what we say to them. They're going to leave anyway. At least this way you've got a chance of getting them back, because all the research says they're more likely to return with better skills, better experience than they had when they left, and, you know, make it a graceful exit. What else? Lady down here. Oh, one over there first. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're talking about it in professional roles, but there's no reason why you can't do it in volunteer role either. And I've done it in both spheres, with benefits to both the mentor, the mentoree, but also the organisation. You end up growing the organisation as well as yourself by doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Lady down there.
Hi, I was a mentor on the last Tranche 2 program with Beck. I guess I would reaffirm that difference between the clinical preceptorship, which I have done in acute care, and mentoring is that you can do the on-site, off-site, face-to-face, use the tech if you need to. You can approach it every which way. And I think from the feedback that I had with other people in the program, there was a lot of us who used all of it. Sometimes we were doing the face-to-face, we were in each other's practices, or we were attending conferences or information sessions together or separately and feeding back. I broke my leg halfway through the program, and I had a little bit of a panic attack thinking, oh, now what am I going to do? I don't want to leave this, mentee high and dry. But I just had to get a little bit more tech savvy and do things differently. So, and it all worked out in the end. One thing about this program that was different to other things I've been involved in was the level of structure. And I think that was pivotal for myself and the mentee that I worked with on how well or the level of success we both achieved within the program. Having milestones to check in, self-assessment tools and those kinds of tools that require regular input keeps you on track. And having set goals early of what was to be achieved, for and on behalf of your mentee. And that stuff worked really well. And I worked with someone who was incredibly clinically competent. So competency wasn't an issue, but had no experience in the primary care setting. So the one-on-one relationship, even with that structure behind it, gives you the flexibility to actually tailor your responses. So they fill the gap for that individual, their gap in previous learning or experience. You can plug that and tailor it really specifically. So this program kind of ticked all those boxes.
It's a very individualised way of learning, isn't it? Anyone else? Okay. So the next question I have for you is, what have you found challenging? We've talked about all the benefits and the great thing about mentoring. When it's not going so well, it can be quite challenging. So what are some of the things, as either mentors or mentees, you've stumbled across that you found challenging?
Hello. So I had two, and I had another transitioning nurse in Norfolk Island. So we had challenges of an ocean. They had lack of technology. They only just got proper internet probably 6 months ago. And it was, they had just come into the Australian government under Medicare as well. So you had resistance in the majority of the population of wanting to come involved under Medicare. And so the nursing staff as well had to change their way of thinking. So there was lots and lots of challenges of not just being the individual mentor, but just getting through organisational, government, distance. And it was a really hard way of getting through. I think we got through, but
Okay.
It was hard.
I can get that. Technology is a bugger when it doesn't work or when you don't have access to it. Am I allowed to use that word? Hopefully I am. What else have you found challenging? Beck, lady right there.
I haven't been in an official mentor role, but from personal experience, working with someone who just doesn't seem to get what you're trying to say to them. That you're trying to say, you need to do this, and they just don't seem to hear it or don't seem to understand it. And that becomes really frustrating because you think, well, how do I better communicate? Am I failing myself because I'm not reaching this person? And it was really challenging with the nurse who joined us, wanting to get into general practice nursing, and it just didn't work. It just didn't connect. So
there's a couple of things to tease out here. Is it a comprehension issue? So I need to change the way I'm communicating so that she understands, or is it a resistance issue in that she's fully understanding, she just doesn't wanna? And so that's where, as a really skillful mentor, you would learn to tease that out with the person by asking some really good questions around, we've been talking about blah, blah. Just wondering how come you didn't do that. Yeah. Oh, one there. No, can we take that one so Beck isn't having to zigzag?
I'd just like to add to that, it's really important that you do have some cooperation with the workplace that your mentee is in. So the transitioning nurse, if you haven't got any cooperation from them or any support or any relationship with them, it's really difficult. It was difficult in our setting that we're a correctional site, so there was a lot of other things that added to that. There was remoteness for Georgie, so there's a lot of things, but having the support. And the other thing with her is that sometimes you're working with different, because we're Australia-wide, we were working with different government bodies and things like that. So that's always a challenge, but having that support that they've got in the workplace is really good and necessary.
Yeah, and sometimes if they don't have the support of their workplace, it's really hard for them to get the time to meet with their mentor or do things in between the conversations that you have. Where's the mic gone?
Hi.
Oh, hi.
I think my main experience has been with preceptorship, coming from acute care and Queensland Health. And part of our training, not so much mentorship, but was that you're dealing with adults and we've all got preconceived notions. We've got different ways of communicating, understanding, those sorts of issues that you had with whether the student or your mentee was receptive or whether we just weren't communicating as well. It's very different dealing with like teaching clinical skills than it is just building confidence and clarity and being able to talk the same language. I found that was a hard thing to get by with certain trainees, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to put a few things up here that might resonate for you or not. Sometimes mentees are not convinced that they need a mentor. So it depends on how people come into a program, but sometimes when you're kind of just given a mentor and you actually don't feel that you need one, it's a bit hard to build a relationship with that person because they'll be picking up the vibe. Mentees that disappear off the radar, they cancel meetings in all sorts of ways, don't respect the mentor's time. That can sometimes be a problem. Not building a really deep connection, either not building rapport or the relationship not getting beyond very shallow issues. That's what we'd call keeping at a kind of transactional level. Ask a question, get an answer. Next time, ask a different question, get another different answer. But with real developmental mentoring, all those questions would add up to some kind of new capacity that person's built over time. And if you don't have the relationship within which which is the environment in which you can actually have that kind of learning experience, it's very difficult. Mentees that lack focus and don't prepare for meetings. So one of the most common issues we have when we're running programs is mentees will sometimes think, oh, this is great, I'm going to have a mentor, fantastic, I'll sign up for this program. And then I'll just turn up and have a conversation with the mentor and they'll just tell me what to do. And we're going, no, that's not how this isn't how it should work. You need to, I think the lady down here was talking about having a goal. You need some kind of direction that comes from you that you can say to the mentor, this is what I'm looking for, these are my learning gaps, or here's the things I'm really trying to achieve. And then they need to also prepare for the meeting so that the mentor doesn't have to fill the space. So have any of you found that that's been a bit difficult, where the mentee hasn't kind of been driving the agenda of what you're talking about and you kind of then have to step in and fill that gap? Okay, I can see it resonates with a couple of people.
Yeah, so I had two completely different examples again. So one mentee really, really wanted to be part of their program and did it off their own back. The other one, the organisation pushed them to do it.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get past that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And actually in the end they probably just didn't feel that they needed it, didn't want to be there, and it ends up wasting everybody's time, to be honest.
We did actually jump on a plane and go visit her. And I think we did, like, having that physical then contact did make a bit of a help.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's often a problem with structured programs is how people come into the program and whether they really want to be there.
That with the program was one of the things that I discussed towards the end of it, was that we had Christmas in the middle of the 12-month program, and it sort of took a chunk of time for everyone to rebuild their momentum.
Yeah.
And it was really important to have that, you know, what are we going to talk about next?
Yeah.
That plan for the last few months. It's sort of, you know, everyone was all excited at the beginning and it went really well, and then Christmas and January, and but that was just, I think, the way the program ran. So it would be different for an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, and that Christmas holiday period, you do lose momentum. We see that all the time.
I was going to say, even not because I'm not involved with the program, but the problems you were talking about having someone who's engaged and someone who isn't, even outside of a program like this. I'm thinking of 2 staff members in particular. I had one nurse that I said before Christmas to have a think about what your learning needs are, let me know, so that after Christmas, let's get some things up and running for you. I'm still waiting for her answer. And then I have another nurse who literally chases me around with learning opportunities and educational things, going, can I go to this? Is this a good idea? Should I be attending this? And it's just 2 complete different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, so it could come back to the different appetites for learning that they have, and it could just simply be one person got distracted with something else and forgot. I mean, this is where good questioning technique becomes really, really important. There's another one up there. Mentees set a goal but doesn't act on them. We get this often from mentors saying, we've talked so many times about what this person wants to do, but they're not taking the steps that they need to take to get them there. What do I do? And that can be quite tough for a mentor. But sometimes you need to be a bit challenging and give people feedback. You keep saying to me, you want this, but I'm not seeing any action. Explain to me what's going on for you. So as you'll see, as we move into this next section, I wanted to give you let's talk about our aim. And I'm going to skip a slide and come back. So my aim for the rest of the time we have together is to provide you with a bigger toolkit, ideally than the one you already have, to enhance whatever skills you've got and to share ideas and good practice around mentoring. If I go back here, these are what we would call some of the baseline skills. So point 1 is really understanding your default mentoring style, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the ability to really listen. Now, I'd imagine as nurses, you'd all be pretty good at that. Who thinks they're a really good listener? Maybe I should have asked, who thinks they're a terrible listener? I mean, when I first decided I wanted to go into coaching, one of the things I realised was I was actually really a bad listener. I had to learn how to listen. Asking really good questions and learning when to shut up and just listen and then ask a good, incisive question. Being able to summarise and synthesise what you're hearing from the person and play that back in a bit of a short summary. Why do you think that's useful as a mentoring skill, by the way? How do you think that works?
If you do the reflective listening, you're actually confirming your understanding of what that person has said.
Yeah, why is it, so that's useful for you. Why is it useful for them?
Because they know that you've heard what they're actually saying.
Okay, and beyond that, can you see something else that's possible? Oh, wait a minute, we'll hear down here.
I was just going to say, sometimes actually hearing the words coming back to you suddenly makes you think, whoa, did I say that? Is that really what I mean? I don't think that's right. So actually hearing them back is a really good point for self-reflection on the mentees.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Did you want to add something to that? Yeah. So sometimes when you hear it back in a much more concise form after 10 minutes of ramble, you go, yeah, that is the issue. And all you've done is summarise. You haven't told them anything different. You haven't given them a piece of advice. You've just summarised what they've said. You know, I've had sessions with people where I've got to the end and I've thought, I've just spent an hour with this person and I've probably opened my mouth twice and said no more than about 30 words. And then they'll get up and they'll say, that was the best session ever. And I'm going, I did nothing. Well, yeah, actually I did. I just deeply listened to them. And they heard themselves. It's very powerful. Role modelling we've touched on. I'll come back to guiding. So reflecting is what one of you said. You know, you're reflecting back what you're hearing. Sometimes it's also reflecting back what you're picking up about the emotion. So these are sort of basic active listening techniques. Why is it useful to reflect back what you're hearing, any emotion you're picking up? So you might say, look, I can, it sounds like you're feeling a bit angry.
They mightn't even know that they're feeling those things.
Yeah. And why is that helpful? Just stay with you for a sec.
Well, it allows them to reflect on the situation, possibly acknowledge that, yes, they are feeling like that, and seeing how that feeling and that way of acting is actually influencing either their role or the situation they're in, and perhaps they might need to take a look at that.
Yeah, and sometimes just naming the emotion takes the heat out of it. Yeah, I am really angry. And then having said, I'm really angry, kind of, okay, now I can move past it. I can put the neocortex, you all know this better than me, that part of my brain that's the logical part of my brain, to work and solve the problem, having put the anger to one side or whatever the emotion is. So really helpful. Guiding is something that we call it guiding. It's a nuance on giving advice. So this is one where instead of saying, I think you should do X, Y, and Z because when I was in your situation, that's what I did and here's my story. Instead, you tell your story and then you invite the mentee to take something out of your story that's useful for them. Can you see the difference? So sometimes when I'm working with someone, I find myself saying, I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but I'll tell them a story. And I don't know where it comes from. It's like a gut. So I think the other thing great mentors do is they trust. They trust their gut. That if a story pops into your head, it's popped into your head for a reason, so tell the story. Because often the person will say, oh, right, now I get it. You know, they've picked up something in your story that they go clink, clunk, two things get put together and they have an aha moment. The beauty of guiding is you tell your story, but you let them make the connection. So back to what you were saying about I'm giving advice, but they're not doing it. Maybe try more telling stories and inviting them to see what's in the story for them that they could act upon. Because sometimes, you know, as adult learners, we need to make the connection for ourselves to be motivated to do it. So I love that skill. That's something really to practice. Tell the story and then you just say, so that's my experience, but, you know, it might be different for you. What do you see in that for you? And they might say, yeah, it's not relevant. It's okay, just move on. Doesn't matter. Challenging. When we ask people what's mentoring, it's pretty rare that people will talk about challenging people to think differently or challenging people to do different things. They'll talk about support and all the things you talked about at the beginning of our session. And it's a skill that we focus on because it's actually really important. Now, Gina and I have just done a piece of research which was inspired by Sheryl Sandberg, you know, the CEO of Facebook. She did a piece of research towards the end of last year in the US that looked at what's happening for men after the hashtag #MeToo movement, all the media reports about sexual harassment. How's that affecting men's attitudes to women in the workplace and what they're prepared to do or not do with their female colleagues? And one of the things they looked at was mentoring, hence our interest in that. So we thought, that's really interesting. Let's see if we can replicate that here in Australia. So we've just finished the study. We're in the final throes of the analysis and writing the report. We have replicated the finding that a number of men, not as many as in the US, are reporting that they're less comfortable socialising with their female colleagues, as well as working alone in an office and mentoring them. So that's concerning, right? Because women need male mentors too. Why did I start this story? I've completely lost my thread. Challenge. That's it. Thank you, Gina. So we added some extra questions and we asked both men and women what were the things they most wanted from mentors, and we gave them a list to choose from. And challenge was number 2, I think. Was it for both or just for men? And number 3 for women, for both. And that actually blew us away because what I said before, when you think about mentoring, challenge isn't one of the first things that pops into your head, but it actually is what people want. And as I was reflecting on that, I thought, yeah, actually, many times we do get feedback, particularly if people haven't done our training at the beginning of the program, which has told them about the role of challenging. We often get the feedback from the mentee, we built this great relationship, it was great, but actually it got a bit cosy and I didn't feel challenged and stretched. So people learn best at the learning at the edge of their comfort zone. You don't want to push them too far out because they'll get scared, but a little bit of challenge from time to time is actually really critical in a mentoring relationship. And it can go both ways. It can actually be the mentee challenging the mentor as well. And asking questions around, well, why are you saying that? And then as the mentor has to reflect on the question, why am I saying that? They're learning something too. So these are what we would call base skills. Plenty of books around, plenty of resource materials around. Many of them you can get free, there's others you can pay for to help you get those basic skills in place. Where do you think you are on some of those skills for those of you that are interested in mentoring and you're doing it already? Do you reckon you're pretty good at most of those? What was that? Need some work on some of them? Okay, cool. Yeah. Challenge yourselves as mentors. And, like I said, I've been working in this space for 20 years and I'm still learning how to do it better. You can never stop learning this stuff. So here's a challenge. You'll all have a default mentoring style. Now, we can kind of put the roles on the map. Sorry, they're a bit small. Can you read the things in the blue bubbles? Yeah, cool. So if we look at how this is spread out, okay, left to right, on the right is more psychosocial support. So, that's all the emotional nurturing and encouraging and all of that. On the other side, career functions, it's more focused on the work. So it's more kind of rational questions around both career but also maybe, technical questions about, well, what do I do in this situation? And you'll see, and then top to bottom is when the mentor's influence is more directive in the top half and less directive in the bottom half. So if I'm being very non-directive, then I'm just making myself available as a thinking partner. Whereas if I'm being very directive, then possibly I'm actually sponsoring the person. So do you know what I mean by sponsor? It's more kind of that dragging them up the ladder, opening doors for them, making sure that people know about them in an organisation or in a profession. Role modelling is off to the right. challenge, which we've just been talked about, might be more off to the left. When I first got into this kind of work, I was pretty clearly in the top left-hand quadrant, very comfortable with being quite directive and really focused on the work. So I had to learn how to do some of the other things. Where do you think your default might be? Could be a quadrant, could be top half, bottom half, left half, right half. Who's more in the top, more directive? Oh, that's interesting. We don't normally get that few people. Is that the nature of nursing? You're all very non-directive in style in nursing? Help me out here. Help me understand that.
It's better they come to the conclusions, I think, sometimes on their own
Right.
and learn that critical thinking ability.
Yeah.
Have you as a sounding board, great,
Yeah.
to bounce ideas off,
Mm.
but it teaches that critical thinking thing better if they come to those conclusions.
Yeah. It's better, except when it's not. Right. So if you see someone about to make a critical mistake, well, take the time to say, and how do you think that will go for you? Meantime, yeah. Anyway, we won't joke about that. Who thinks they're more right-hand side? Okay, quite a few. And left? Oh, okay, only a couple. So, look, is there the best quadrant to be in? No. So the point is to get flexible and be able to move around the map. I think a really skilled, masterful mentor knows how to do that. Now, how do you know which role to be in? Sorry, just shout a bit louder because I can't hear. Depends on the situation. So the context will guide you. What else? The experience of the mentee. Who said that? Was that you? Yeah, so I was looking at you.
It's your experience as well as theirs, like what
Yeah.
how do you reflect in practice in that level of
Mm.
or we think if I come across something with that.
Yeah.
It's that experience that I personally draw on to use any of those capabilities depending on the situation.
Yeah. Okay. What else would determine what role you step into? Yeah.
They're going to want a bit more direction.
Yeah.
Or if they are in a calmer spot and then think more clearly, are able to sort of
Yeah.
what do you think you should do.
Yeah.
So it depends on emotions and crisis.
Yeah. So did everyone hear that? If they're in crisis and they're in a highly emotional charged state, then you've got to help them work through that before you can have a sensible conversation about anything. So validate the emotion. So that's an assessment of what you think the mentee needs. But sometimes it's good to ask if you don't know, or don't assume. So you might think, right, well, what they need now is for someone to give them a good piece of advice. But if that's not actually what they want and need at the time, then you'll get resistance, right? So often what I do is actually ask. So as we think about this issue, what's the best role for me to play? What's going to be the most helpful for you? Do you want me to be a sounding board for you on this and we'll just bounce around some ideas, throw some ideas in the pool? Or do you want me to tell you a story about when I've experienced it myself? So try that, because it's actually inviting the mentee to get what they need from you, and often we don't think to ask. So if you take nothing else away from today, there's copies of these notes on the table, and if you don't get one, I'm sure Beck can arrange to send it to you. If nothing else, if you're in a mentoring relationship, this is a really great thing to talk about with your mentee and ask them what's their preference of how they would like you to work with them overall. And then just as a reminder in the moment to say, well, where do you want me to be? Okay, some other things to look at are how do you take the relationship deeper? So remember before we talked about sometimes it stays fairly shallow and you never really go deeper, and it stays a bit transactional. So we're going to talk about that. We've kind of talked about listening, so we might skip that. I want to talk a bit about goals and then introduce you to a couple of tools and techniques. So this is a model from 2 researchers in the UK, and this applies to any kind of developmental relationship in terms of the depth of the dialogue mapped against impact. So the deeper you go in the dialogue, the more impact it will have. Now that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So if you kept all of your conversations in your mentoring relationship at a very social level, then you might get to the end of 6 months working with that person and they've had some nice coffee catch-ups, but they haven't really had anything with any great impact. When it moves into the technical aspects of their job, then that's really helpful. Question whether that's the role of the mentor to be teaching them the technical aspects of their job, I don't know. But again, that's kind of the next level of impact. Tactical would be taking the conversation beyond the technical part of your actual job into more short-term issues which might, well, often are soft skills issues. So sometimes it can be, I'm having an issue with a co-worker, I don't know how to work it out. We've got a conflict and we need help dealing with it. When a mentor is able to play back to a mentee, you know what, I've heard you talk now 3 conversations in a row about issues and conflicts you have with your co-workers. Do you think maybe there's a pattern here? That starts to bring it to a strategic level of conversation because you're talking about the pattern, not this one instance of this one problem with this one co-worker. Then that starts to have greater and greater impact. When you actually can move into conversations where the mentee walks away with a greater level of self-awareness than they had before the conversation, that's even getting more impactful. When they move through to being able to make real behaviour change, then they're going even deeper. And integrative is more when conversations allow people to get a real sense of who they are that's different. So remember I said at the beginning, what I love and makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up is when people say, I'm not the same person as I was before I started this mentoring relationship. Then you know the conversations have gone about as deep as they can go and have had about as much impact. So it's not to say every conversation has to be a deep and meaningful, because actually maybe that's not what's needed at the time. But I'm just inviting you to have a look at what's the level of the dialogue that you're having with your mentees and think about what impact that might be having. So for some of you that are already in mentoring relationships, where do you think your conversations mostly are? In the notes, I think you've got a page on each of these, I think. If not, I can send the deck. Where do you think you are? Do you think you're more at the lower levels of impact, or you're really having very deep conversations? Pardon? About the middle? Yeah. For the lady just at this table who was talking about the woman who decided to make a career change, that would have been up to the right. That was a major impact on her life, making that decision. Any thoughts about this?
At the time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in any one conversation you might hit all of those.
Yeah, so I think, again, that is the flexibility that you need as a mentor
Yeah.
to be able to respond in different ways to different issues, and whether it's a professional development, something inside the workplace, something outside the workplace.
Yeah.
And the other thing is to recognise when you don't have a response, I guess, where you can't pull something out of your hat, but you might know someone who can, about
Beautiful.
sharing that mentorship a little bit, and
Yeah.
not being afraid to sort of say to your mentee, that one I've not come across before, leave it with me, let me go talk to a few people, I'll get back to you, or I know a colleague who has insight into that, can I put her in touch with you or him in touch with you, something along
Yeah,
those
beautiful.
lines.
Yeah. You don't have to know all the answers, you know.
Younger ones know more about technology.
Yeah.
Miles ahead.
Yeah.
So you might be a mentor in other ways, but they're your mentor in technology.
Yeah, we often get reverse mentoring happening, don't we? Yeah. Anyway, that's just a bit of a provocation to think about, can I go deeper? Should I go deeper? And again, you could have a conversation with your partner about that. I want to just get to, so I'm going to skip that, although you might find that one interesting. Have you seen this model? 5 levels of listening. There's lots of different versions of this kind of model around, but at the base level of listening, we're listening so that we can put an argument or refute what the person's saying back to them, or listening so that we can, and we're already thinking about the next question, and of course when we're thinking about the next question we've stopped listening. Most people, I think, stop at listening to understand. So we were talking before about why is it useful. When you summarise, well, actually then you're helping someone else understand themselves. The hardest thing to do is to listen without intent. Now, some people say that's impossible. Probably is. You actually have to clear your mind completely and just focus on the words. Hard not to be kind of making meaning as you go. Okay, I'm just going to skip past that one now. I think we're going to go to this. So, can we do a little bit of work at your tables and have a little bit of a play and a practice? It would be great if one or two of you could role play being a mentee, maybe with a particular issue, or maybe you're not role playing, maybe you have a real issue that, and something you're grappling with that you could use some input from somebody on, and somebody role play being the mentor to help them with that. And I invite you to use anything we've talked about today so far that you might want to try out for the first time. So maybe it's, might be hard to do challenge because you need enough rapport to be able to challenge somebody. So if you haven't met people at your table, that might be asking a bit much. But it might be a different way of listening, or, practicing asking, what would you most like from me today? Would you like me to brainstorm with you, or whatever? Just anything at all that you want to practice. Just have a little go, just for 10 minutes at your tables. You can have a couple of little groups going at one table if you like. Maybe the people sitting down the back just form 1 or 2 groups. Maybe you 2 ladies go and join over there, or you could just do your own little practice. And I'll check in again with you in a few minutes. Sorry, I'd love to have had another 20 minutes to do a few more exercises with you, but I don't want to make you late for the break. So any quick feedback? Anyone try something different and that was fun? Shh. That always works. It's amazing. Anyone try something different and want to give us feedback? Probably wasn't long enough to really get into a discussion. Yeah. If it's okay, we've got only a couple minutes left. I want to just share with you a couple of other techniques that I use a lot. This one is when people are being very black and white with an issue and they can only see there's either black or there's white, and it helps people with seeing the shades of grey. And I'm going to use an example to bring it to life a little bit. I was working with a woman who, she was in a corporate role in a big company, and she was quite senior, and she was finding it hard to find her voice as a senior manager in this particular organisation. And she was saying, well, I need to speak up more, but I don't want to be that irritating person that speaks over other people and always is so highly opinionated and never gives anybody else time to say anything. In fact, I'm surrounded by people like that. I don't want to be like them. But I also don't want to be, this is out of the conversation. She didn't actually come up with this, but as we talked, we teased this out. I also don't want to be the shrinking violet where I'm not able to voice my opinion. So, and you'll see there's two little cartoons there. So we literally said, okay, let's find a little cartoon character to describe these two ends of this spectrum. So we literally, shrinking violet, don't want to be shrinking violet. Well, what's a character that would bring to life the other end of the extreme? And we came up with Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. You know, that little bouncy character that, if you're not a morning person, would bounce in the morning and be so enthusiastic, and you're still trying to get yourself out of bed, right? And she was quite introverted, so that kind of extroverted, high energy, that's not her at all. So then we said, okay, so we don't want to be at those ends. Where do you think you are now? And she said, well, I think I'm being a bit too much shrinking violet. So I'm well left of the middle. Okay, where would you like to be? Oh, I'd like to be somewhere in the middle. And then we brought that to life and said, we didn't actually give it a character, but we really described what would it be like if she was being in the middle between shrinking violet and Tigger. And she was able to really describe that, and then we could talk about strategies that maybe could get her there. So I find this a really useful technique. You can, whatever the issue is, whenever you see someone's moving to this, it's black or white and they're really opposite. And they don't think they have a choice, right? That's the important thing here. I can either be shrinking violet or I can be Tigger. Well, no, there's a place somewhere in the middle. Anyone tried anything like that before? Yeah, okay, cool. So try it out, it's fun. The other thing I encourage you to do is scripting and drawing. So I like drawing because I'm a very visual person, and so when someone's having trouble sometimes describing their issue, and sometimes you notice they're going round and round in circles with words, then I'll pass them a piece of paper and some coloured pencils and I'll say, just draw it for me. And it's amazing the clarity some people will get when they get a chance to actually visualise it on paper. And you can even say, draw yourself in this situation and then draw the other people in the situation. And you'll notice things like how far apart they put themselves from the others, and there's always meaning in that. So how come you put this person a long way away from you, but this other person is closer, and then they'll start talking about that. So really helpful. Scripting can be, asking them to keep a journal, or even in the moment when you're having a conversation, asking them to write a little bit of a story about their situation. I find the drawing one even better. So, let's wrap up. What have you found useful today? I'm sorry we didn't have a bit longer for practice, but we had a good conversation and lots of feedback. How do you feel now about mentoring? What are you taking away with you from today? If anything. Hopefully something.
I actually came here today to up my skills because I've got 2 new staff members, but I'm actually thinking now after today's session that I actually probably need a mentor myself to help me be a more positive leader in my practice.
Great. Do both. Other thoughts?
I just think it's important that we all have a mentor ourselves as well as mentoring others.
Yeah, important to have a mentor ourselves as well as mentoring others. Yeah.
One thing you haven't mentioned today is about whether or not mentorship is your line management, about the whole thing about where your mentor
Oh, okay. So remember there was an earlier definition of mentoring. Remember it said offline. Oh, hang on to the microphone. We'll give you 2 secs. Gina's just pointing out that the best mentor is usually not someone who's your direct manager. It's somebody who's more objective. Yeah. Doesn't have an agenda. Someone down there?
No, I think it's sort of been said, that idea that, yes, I need a mentor too, but how to fit it in. So it's finding the right person and clarifying the role and, yeah, learning a bit more about it.
Okay. Anything else?
And that's really good that we're starting to get the word out more, and I guess that's something we can keep working on. People can say, actually, I'm looking for someone and try and connect. Maybe we can become the new dating forum.
APNA Tinder. Please just don't do speed mentoring. I hate speed mentoring. Anything else? Any other comments? Okay, thank you for coming along today. Hope it's been useful, and thanks for having us.